Welcome to the Great Ideas Podcast, where we explore many topics, including leadership, teamwork, relationships, politics, economics, pop culture, health, sports, food, and anything else that's a great idea. I'm your host, Barry Moline. Today, we're talking with Jamie Miller, a political consultant and former head of the Republican Party in Florida. We discuss the evolving strategies of the Trump administration, contrasting what Jamie calls the politics of subtraction from Trump's first term, what he calls the politics of addition he's trying in this new approach. We explore Trump's openness to offbeat ideas and individuals like Elon Musk and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and how this shift impacts everything. We also delve into broader economic challenges, the need for budgetary reforms, and specific proposals affecting agencies like USAID. Finally, we reflect on Trump's leadership style, media dynamics, and the implications for U.S. domestic and foreign policies. Let's get into it. Hey, Jamie, it's great to see you.
Hey, Barry, thanks for having me. I think it's my second time on your show, so repeat customer. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully we'll be talking a lot more. It seems like there's a lot going on in the new Trump administration. Many things have changed, I guess. Actions taken, a few changes moving into play. Can you step back a second and take a look at this, not from the individual actions that have taken place, which we'll get into, but from a 50,000 foot level? Is there a broad strategy that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think there's a major pivot that has happened between both Donald Trump and his staff between, let's say, his first administration and his second, the current administration. And I simply like to call that the difference between the politics of subtraction and the politics of addition. In 2017, his first year, you would look at somebody like Marco Rubio and people who ran against him, and he cut them out of his orbit. And it was, if you weren't with me, you must have been against me, and I'm moving on without you. And yet in the 2024 campaign, you saw him embrace more ideas, different people, Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., go down the list of the people who I would say are this group that in 2016 he would not have had on his team or had as surrogates or anything else. And so I think that if you're kind of cautious about Donald Trump, I think that's probably a good thing. Whether you like those names or not, whether you like those particular people or not, I think the politics of addition that we're seeing out of Donald Trump is a positive move forward, not only for his presidency, but for the country.
Would you say that it brings in a variety of ideas and things that he and his internal team may not have had on their plate before, so ideas are coming in from elsewhere? And for example, let's say Robert Kennedy Jr., who I don't know that Donald Trump feels strongly about what's on Robert Kennedy Jr.'s portfolio or plate or list of things to do, but there's some support within the MAGA movement for Kennedy. So Kennedy, let's see what you can do and give us some ideas.
Yeah, I think a good example is the Pete Hegseth nomination, right? So we're coming into Christmas. Hegseth has been announced. He's stumbling a bit. They've taken some shots at him, and he's taken some body blows, and he's kind of up against the ropes. And I think Donald Trump said, hey, if you want it, go get it, right? I'm not going to pull your nomination back just because you're having some trouble. But if you want to go fight for it, I'm going to stand behind you. I may not get that close to you, but I'm going to stand behind you and let you take your best shot and go fight for it. And Pete Hegseth said, I want that opportunity. I'm going to go fight for it. And so I think that's the type of leader that Donald Trump is. And I think one of the things, also difference between 2020 from kind of a high level view and 2024, I think voters looked at Donald Trump differently. In 2020, people did not like the fires that Donald Trump set himself. And he tweets too much. He did this, he did that. And so they were very critical of kind of his self-inflicted wounds. And in 2024, I think they took a different approach, voters did, by saying, we are going to support Donald Trump because he leads us through fire despite the fires he sets. So we don't care if you set fires as long as you lead us through. And so I think you're seeing that leadership from Donald Trump, where he's like, hey, as we get into more specific issues, many of your viewers and listeners may say, hey, this is, he's setting a lot of fires. And I would suggest that that's exactly what the American people asked him to do, is to go in and break some glass and set fires. But I do think he's going to, as long as he sees us through, I think people will tolerate it.
So just shake things up, no matter where. Let's see how things fall, and you never know.
I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a great example. Like you suggested, their visions may not be the same. I would even question whether Donald Trump has a vision for health and human services, right? So he's like, oh, well, Robert F. Kennedy has a vision. Go fight for it and see what you can do, and I'll stand behind you. And so I think that's what we're seeing play out in his confirmation, is that, Donald Trump's like, if you have a specific vision, I'm hiring you because I trust you, and I maybe buy into your vision 100%, or maybe not, but I'm trusting you and your vision to go get it done.
One of the friction points that I feel that, let's just say, the mainstream, the status quo folks have, is that they're accustomed to government taking action in a methodical way, meaning we're going to take action, we're going to do something, but we'll have 3 months of hearings, and then we'll talk about it, and then we're going to take that action. It looks methodical. It may not be methodical. There may be an end game that is, we're going to do this anyway. Still, there's an opportunity for voices to be heard, dissenting voices to be heard, and people feel like they got a shot, but that's not happening. What's happening is let's take, it seems like it's the sort of trial balloon, or maybe beyond that, we're just going to take the action, and then we'll see how it goes. So while I don't really want to dwell on the Gaza proposal, let's turn Gaza into a Middle East Riviera, and we'll move the Palestinians out to other countries, and we're going to make this place look really nice. That may be a proposal that very conservative Israelis like. It sort of gets rid of the Gazans. And I don't know, maybe President Trump thought, let's just pitch it and see what happens. There was pushback. Okay, we won't talk about that anymore. Is that what we imagine will be the common way of rolling out new ideas?
I think so. I think the American people, though, have one differing opinion, is that I think the American people would see 3 or 4 months of studies, interagency communication, and then like some big memos written saying that we did or could have done something or are doing something about whatever problem, and yet nothing gets done. It's the report that gets done and not real action. And the American people voted for action. I agree with you that Donald Trump has thrown 2 or 3 things on the table that stayed on the table for moments, if not, maybe 2 or 3 days. And okay, and I think he's one of these guys who takes in a lot of input from a lot of people. When he hears different viewpoints and it's interesting, I think he tries to throw it out there and see where it lands, and if he likes it. And like you said, the Gaza, I think, is a good example of, hey, sounds wonderful. When he was having a meeting, I'm not sure exactly the timing of when he made those comments, but it was 24 to 48 hours before or after he met with President Netanyahu. And so I don't know if that was a conversation that the two of them had, or if it was something that somebody maybe, as he was being briefed for that meeting, that, there was kind of this conversation that took place. I did see the little meme online of Susie Wiles kind of startled and looking at Donald Trump when he said it. So they certainly speculated that she was surprised that came out of his mouth, but I don't know if that's true or not, but that's kind of the meme that was floating around.
I saw a clip of Jared Kushner talking about that idea a year ago. So It probably is something that's been tossed around in the background, and Donald Trump just chose that moment after just having met with Netanyahu to pitch it and see what happens.
Sometimes I think you have to look at the conversation he's having with the reporter he's having it with. And I don't know the specifics of this one because I didn't see it live and I didn't see the whole thing. But I have seen him in the past where it's like, okay, well, this isn't going exactly where I want it. So I'm pivoting over here. So whatever you're just asking me about is now clearly off the table because I came up with this other thing that you're now going to ask me about.
Yeah. And then there's always this follow-up gotcha question, which was part of the headline. And that was a question from a reporter. Would you rule out the use of U.S. forces to protect the construction workers in a Gaza rebuild or something like that? And Trump said, well, I wouldn't rule it out. And of course, then it becomes the headline, Trump using U.S. forces to rebuild Gaza. And that's the media just looking for eyeballs. And that's kind of unfortunate. Reporters know that I don't know what you call it, the genre of questions. How can we elevate this so that we get more people paying attention?
I was joking with an elected official today, and I was speaking with him last night. He's like, I've got to go. I'm on a plane. And he hangs up. And so I was like, oh, I need to finish this conversation with you. So I'm texting him back and forth. And just for giggles, he's like, well, the flight attendant was going to, I almost got arrested because the flight attendant, I wouldn't get off the phone. And so I was like, so then I put, this person nearly arrested for causing chaos on the plane, and put it in quotes and sent it to him, just text, just messing with him. But we're in that hypersensitive time where everything is a huge headline to get people to click. Everybody's looking for that 8-second soundbite to hook them into watching a video. And so I said it in jest to this particular elected official, but it was, these folks are hypersensitive to a lot of that, so it's like you said, it's an interesting time, and people need to take some of those headlines with a grain of salt.
And headlines do not accurately reflect what's in an article. I look at the 50,000 foot perspective from in this way, and that is that there's no question that things need to change in the federal government. And forget any details for the moment, but if you look at the very broad measures, we are deficit spending by, I think, $2 trillion a year, something of that nature. Mm-hmm. Is that accurate?
That's the number I'm hearing, yes.
Yeah. So that's been going on for decades. I mean, the number hasn't been $2 trillion for decades, but it's been growing over time.
It is.
And we constantly hear that's unsustainable, and we need to get that into check. We need to balance the budget. We need to spend less. There's a lot of hand-wringing constantly about that issue. So the very broad strokes, things need to change economically, and however it's done, somebody's ox is going to get gored, and there will be, a shrinking of economic activity for some group or for many groups, whatever that might be. It's still, something has to be done because you cannot continue to build up your credit card. Eventually the credit card company shuts you off. So there's that on one end. And then two, how do you go about doing that? Is it, let's just break some glass and then we'll figure it out? Or is there a methodical way? And I see that President Trump is not, he doesn't prefer the methodical. He doesn't prefer the methodical approach. He prefers what we've been talking about, which is let's pit something, or let's just roll it out and we're just going to do it. And if there's enough pushback, maybe we'll change or shift. But if there's not, we're just going to keep going forward. So again, two ends of the spectrum there. Something's got to be done. What's the right approach for doing it? This is Trump's approach.
Well, I look at, our own budgets within our house, right? So most people, their housing is their most expensive item. And when you have to cut your budget, most people don't leave their house, right? They try to, they don't sell their house and downsize just because they're having a bump in the road. Now, if they have a permanent bump in the road, that's a whole different thing. But if you're having a bump in the road, you don't just, okay, I'm selling my house and moving to an apartment. You're like, okay, I'm going to try to not eat out as much, or I'm going to, if I have somebody coming in and clean the house or mow the lawn or any of those types of services that you may hire out for, I'm going to quit doing that, and I'm going to do that myself. So we all in our own budgets save money on the edges, right? And so certainly we have to stop there, but I don't think we're going to see these wholesale changes to Medicare, Social Security, the defense. I think you will see some cuts in defense as they find waste, as DOJ finds waste, but we're not going to get rid of the Defense Department. We're not going to get rid of these other things. So I think what you're seeing now is somebody looking at it like you do your own budget. Like maybe we're only saving $3 million on a little program here or there. But if we don't need to spend that $3 million, let's save it. And let's say maybe it's $300 million. Let's save it. Then it's like, okay, now let's get to the things that are, what can we do? I'm buying a new car. Do I go buy that Cadillac, or I'm in a 3-year plan? Let's face it, we're not in a 1 year, we're going to fix this in a year. We're in a 5 to 10 year plan. So we need to go decide, hey, we're not going to buy the Cadillac for 10 years. We're going to go put up with the Camry. And maybe we even pay that Camry off and live with with no payment for a while. And so to get expenses under control. And so I think you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see some short term, we're going to stop spending money on this, some 3 to 5 year major cuts, and then probably even some 10-year plans that get put on the table to protect long-term spending.
All right, so let's talk about some of those proposals that have come down the pike. Let's go right to USAID. It looks like there's been an overall shutdown of the agency. And is that what you're seeing? A complete shutdown of everything?
That's what appears, yes.
And good idea, bad idea? What are your thoughts?
I liken it to, here I live in Sarasota, Florida, so we face spring a little sooner. So I'm going to start some spring yard work this weekend. And some of my bushes, we had a very cold winter here. And so some of the bushes are going to have to get cut down to the root and to get rid of all the waste. And then those bushes are going to grow this spring, and I'm going to shape them to be the bushes I want this summer, right? And so I think that's an example of what is happening at USAID is, they said, listen, that department may or may not go away. I know Congressman Greg Steube filed a bill to get rid of it permanently. People are talking about doing away with the Department of Education permanently. But some of the things that are happening in those departments are going to be seen as somewhat essential, if not completely essential. And even if the departments go away, some of those programs are going to live. Pell Grants, for instance, at the Department of Education existed long before there was a Department of Education. Pell Grants will likely continue if the Department of Education goes away.
Special education, for example.
Yeah.
I doubt that that has pretty widespread support.
Or schools on Indian reservations, right? Which is clearly a federal constitutional priority. So you're going to see some of those projects stay. They're just going to. And so do we need the bloated administration of these departments to continue administering these programs? And so I think you're going to see USAID, the contracts have been canceled, and you start looking at some of the things that we were paying for. USAID was to provide humanitarian aid and increase democracy throughout the world. It wasn't to take fringe domestic politics to international countries. And that's what USAID had become to some degree. $2.5 million for electric vehicle stations in cities in Vietnam. Why are we paying for that? $400,000 for Indonesian coffee companies to be more gender equitable and more climate friendly. $3.3 million for being LGBTQ in the Caribbean. So if you claim to be LGBTQ, we were just giving you money to help you in that plight, I guess, of being LGBTQ in the Caribbean. 15 million for condoms in the Taliban is one of the things that's great. Like DEI programs in Singapore. So you see these programs that are not the very extreme political programs in the United States. And this particular agency is supposed to be taking democracy into other countries, humanitarian aid into other countries, not extreme political theory. And so, of course, these things should not be financed by the American taxpayer and should be among the first things that are on the chopping block. Should we continue to provide humanitarian aid for foreign countries? And should we continue to promote democracy in other countries? Yes, because if we don't, China is going to go influence those countries. And so the practical application is, so some of these programs aren't going to go away. We're going to prune it down to the roots and let it grow back into hopefully some of those stray, crazy programs never end up back in the budget.
Yeah, the need for soft power, which is what you're alluding to in terms of humanitarian aid, as well as the focus on core concerns for the United States, democracy versus communism and so on. If we have a broader interest, for example, in a country and we want to build support across that country, again, because of a high level interest and want to build support throughout the country, there's value in funding the creation or construction of a dam, maybe, if it brings that country up. Again, if there's a broader strategic interest. While that is infrastructure and is not necessarily meant for hearts and minds, people know where the money's coming from.
Really?
I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala from 88 to 90, and my experience on the one-on-one level in my community and the hundreds of people that I touched through my 2 years was they came away. I'm pretty much 100% certain that they came away feeling like, oh, the U.S. is kind of a nice place, I guess. I like Barry. And Barry helped me build some energy efficient cook stoves and latrines and communities and so on. And we did this in various towns. And we effectively left them better off individually, but also better off as nobody ever said to me, you have to convey a certain policy of the federal government. But the programs that I was trained to implement were effectively policies of the government. We're going to do things to help reduce deforestation or help health so that people are pooping in latrines as opposed to out in a field. The point being that was soft power. The cost of me being a volunteer, well, that time, it was decades ago, was probably $5,000 for 2 years. It wasn't a lot. Maybe the cost is now, let's say, $30,000 or $40,000. That's pretty inexpensive strategically. If you're going in and doing that, do you want to build a foundation across the country where people say, yeah, I kind of like the U.S. And then at a different level, the U.S. is doing things that are in our strategic interest as well at the country level. So they go hand in hand. I think what I heard you say is this effort to shut down USAID is a recalibration of that policy. And I think what I heard you say is some of those things will come back. They'll be done in a strategic way. Is that what you said?
Well, and if they, like I said, there is a congressman who filed a bill to completely do away with USAID. My guess is if there's critical humanitarian aid and democracy programs that exist in USAID, and I think most people would say there are some, maybe they fall under the Secretary of State. And, instead of having this whole organization, that there's this administration, the administrative costs of that organization, that maybe just the critical things are handled with the Secretary of State, who is our leader in foreign countries. right? Or our face in foreign countries, or, the spokesperson in foreign countries lacking the president's voice, right? If the president's not there. And so that may be appropriate to take any critical programs and put them under the Secretary of State rather than having them under USAID. And I'm sure there will be many debates about it. There's certainly Democrats are bringing up the constitutional question of whether the president can even cut funding and costs after Congress has passed an appropriation bill. I would suggest that, Congress has not passed a budget, which includes 12 appropriation bills on time since 1997. And we haven't had a balanced budget since 2001. And so we've kind of been swinging through the jungle, vine to vine, saying with these continuing resolutions, and I would suggest that under continuing resolutions, that what Congress is doing is giving the president that exact power to determine what to cut expenses, because if Congress wants to have a budget that the president has to adhere to, pass a budget. And this is not a Democrat or Republican thing, but we've had both administrations. Both parties have been in charge solely of at least the administration and House and Senate for, I think, 4 or 6 years during the past 25 years. It's been split most of the time. So the fact that neither party has taken their opportunity when they had full power to pass a budget and decided just to continue with resolutions is, I think it begs the president to step in and say, where's the waste and I'm cutting.
I think, to clarify, among us two, dummies who are trying to figure this out, touch this elephant, is that there's no question that Congress identifies the programs and the money it wants to spend, and it's up to the administration to implement that program. Those programs can be implemented poorly, or they can be implemented slowly, and Congress then does an oversight hearing and says, do it faster, do it better. And then the administration can still do it slowly and poorly.
Or not at all.
Or not at all.
Or kind of not at all. Yeah.
So in my understanding, it is accurate that it's Congress that drives the funding and drives the creation, the direction of programs. The administration
historically has always been that way until Woodrow Wilson. Just to take a step back in time, Woodrow Wilson was the first president to give Congress a budget instead of the other way around. And Congress was like, what? Like, we're the one who handle money. You just do what we say. And that then entered the 20th century of the powerful president versus a weaker president. And so now, I think the public is accepting that the president is in charge of some level of spending or not spending money, whether the Constitution and when this all lawsuits and judicial and all these other things happen. Just today, a judge put a stop order on, or at least extended the ability for federal employees today was the day they were supposed to say whether or not they were going to take the buyout or not. And that's been extended at least until Monday at midnight. And, there's some question that can an employee accept this buyout? And so let's take the scenario of somebody who's eligible for retirement and they take the buyout and now the buyout's illegal, but they went on to get another job and it's a better job and they like it better. And now do they have to return to their job in the federal government, should the lawsuit win, to get their retirement? And so there's some, the devil's in the details in all of these things. And so you start getting into the practical application of what may or may not be. I don't know the answer to that, but I just know that there's people out there who are concerned about such things.
Yeah, as far as the implications go, those are interesting developments. I would probably guess that it's Congress that would have to approve some kind of a buyout budget, and then the administration would then implement it. So as far as all the other things you talked about, those are implications I couldn't imagine that what would happen. Nevertheless, they'll sort them out through their lawsuits. So let's run through a few items sort of quickly, report card fashion, and maybe we can explain a little bit along the way, but we'll move quickly. So the U.S. withdrew from the WHO, the World Health Organization. Was that a good idea? What's that about?
It seems years ago. So yes, I think it's probably what this president has said is that he is tired of us paying the bill for everybody else to have a free ride. And the World Health Organization is certainly one of the organizations where we pay the bill and everybody else gets to dictate to us the policy. And so we're removing ourselves to maybe it gets reset, maybe maybe this is an entire 4-year issue. Maybe a future president rejoins it. I know Argentina also withdrew this week. And so my guess is you'll see the World Health I doubt that all these other countries get together and fund the World Health Organization to the extent that it was with U.S. support.
I guess I saw the mission of WHO as trying to keep other parts of the world healthy and coordinate things like pandemics and so on. But I guess that's not a priority for the president.
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with the inner workings of WHO to say, what they've done or not. I think from the longer view of it, there's a lot of these things where this president appears to have said, at least for now, we are going to remove ourselves because we have to get our house in order. We cannot continue to go $2 trillion in debt every single year. That is unsustainable. And so where can I cut the most? Where do you cut? Many families who are listening to this, if they're having financial struggles, they're going to cut on their vacation this summer, right? Look at WHO as a vacation. Like, is it great to go to Europe? Yeah, I can't afford to go to Europe. Maybe I'll go camping instead. Okay, that's a savings we're going to have.
So you see that as falling in the category of not sure we're getting the value for what we're paying for.
Sure.
Yeah. Immigration enforcement. How do you think we're doing in that regard?
It's amazing how quickly the numbers at the border have dropped. And, simply through a few actions, it's not like Donald Trump has deported millions of people in those first 2 weeks. It's maybe thousands. It's certainly thousands, but I don't even know that it's tens of thousands.
10,000 now.
I was going to say, I don't think it's tens of thousands. So if it's close to 10, certainly point made to these other countries that you are not welcome here to come illegally, and if you're going to come here and be a criminal, you are not welcome here. I've said that we need to look at immigrants, illegal and legal, and clarify that you are guests in our country, and we should treat them as guests, legal and illegal. They are guests. We should treat them as guests. However, if you came to the party uninvited and you start breaking out the windows, we're sending you home. And we'll put up with some of it if you're uninvited and you're providing for the party. Hey, people are laughing at your jokes, all that sort of stuff. But, when you start breaking the glass, then it's time to go home. And so I think that's the way the president, the analogy I use for the president on this one. And it seems to have had an immediate effect on the number of people who are traveling through Mexico to even come to our southern border to try to enter illegally.
Yeah. And immigration is a fascinating topic because, well, first, I agree, people are committing crimes, illegal immigrants. Those are not folks that we know that they're out there and we're continuing to walk among us. Not a good idea. From a business perspective, there are a lot of businesses that, like it or not, are, I suppose, operating illegally using illegal labor, and that's got to be addressed. That's a little bit more of a can of worms, and that's going to be interesting as to how it settles out. It's not just illegals picking strawberries in California. There are people in plenty of red states at chicken workers, processing factories,
right.
Construction workers, yeah, and being paid in cash and so on. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying it's complicated. And how that shakes out is going to be a big impact on business. So hopefully we can seek some resolution there, because we want to keep the economy moving. And it appears to me as though those folks are not taking jobs from Americans. They're doing jobs that Americans may not want to do.
Yeah, and I don't know that that's them forever, right? I always say that, people are fine with sending the criminals home. You start sending away or deporting people who own my favorite Mexican restaurant. Now you're touching me. Like, I eat there every Tuesday night, and now it's closed. And how much do Americans tolerate when it's my child's best friend who just got deported with their parents? And so where's that tipping point where America says this is enough or this is too much? It certainly isn't with the first 10,000, but we've all of us who have said, hey, that we have to get this under control, have said from the very beginning, we have to stop illegals from getting here first. Then we can kind of tackle what's going on from a logical standpoint of who's here, who's contributing to society, who's not. And like you said, it's complicated. What if a mom is, hey, she's working really hard and the dad's a thug? And now, do we send the thug home and keep the productive mom and the kids, or what? Or do we take the whole family and say, oh, you've got one bad apple, it ruined the whole bunch? And so there's a lot of practical application issues here. My guess is that Donald Trump and Homan are going to continue to press the envelope. And for instance, right now, if there's 4 illegals in a house and one's a criminal and they come in the house and they find 4 are getting deported. And so, you're harboring not only an illegal, but a criminal. You're all going. And so my guess is you'll get some level of people starting to say, hey, what if I turn in that guy? Can I stay? And it gets complicated. Well, are we going to do that? Is that going to case by case basis, or is that going to be an administration policy? You really do get in a devil is in the details on an issue like that, because at some level, that's, I think, what we may start seeing.
Yeah. So tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China, it looked like Wall Street objected at least to the tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and then those got quickly dropped. I think the tariffs on China are still in play, and we're looking at responses from China. Thoughts on that?
Well, the United States Postal Service, I think, delayed all shipments from China for 3 days. I think they restarted today. And so the Trump supporters have speculated for some time that this is Trump's, negotiation tactic. And I think that those folks are probably correct that he uses a negotiation tactic. But the reason why it's effective is that because he's willing to do it. He's willing to go through with it if he has to. And that's why I think folks immediately said, okay, well, let's at least come to the table for 30 days. And then Donald Trump says, hey, Secretary of State Rubio, I got another job for you. Go down and get Panama. Some good things happened there. Maybe not exactly what we wanted, but we moved the ball in the right direction in one visit. In one visit to Panama by the Secretary of State, we moved the ball in the right direction.
What was the outcome there? Because I know that the issue was not that we were going to take over the Panama Canal again, but it was between the U.S. and China, and right.
Yes. And so there's this the Road and Belt Initiative, and I wanted to call it Road and Bridge. And I was like, that's not correct. It's the Road and Belt Initiative that is kind of China's, putting these outposts throughout the world so they can move goods and services throughout the world easier. And so China is filling a void that, if we and other democracy loving countries don't, they're going to. But in Panama, they decided immediately after Secretary of State Rubio's visit that they are going to not renew the Road and Belt Initiative that is expected to expire in Panama in 2027. And they're studying getting out of it sooner. And then finally, and this isn't that big of a deal because I think it's something like 3% of ships that go through the Panama Canal are U.S. flagged, but they've either reduced or eliminated the taxes for those ships. So there's an immediate effect, positive impact from visiting. Then you look at the tariffs from Mexico and Canada. They at least went into a 30-day delay. And, Senator Rubio says that he's going to Mexico to work on certainly the situation there. And so I think that's exactly why people hired Donald Trump, is to get things done. And I think the devil's in the details in a lot of it. However, he's going to move forward in what he thinks is a positive way.
So tariffs, negotiating strategy, threat. Let's come to the table and talk about these difficult issues.
And he'll implement them. I think he'll implement them if he has to. But yeah. I think everybody would rather not have them, both sides. And I think they realize that, hey, if I'm going to do this, I'm serious about it. I will do it. And that's what gets people to the table, is the fact that he will do it.
Yeah. Two other things I'd like to get your reflection on. They both relate to law enforcement. One is the whole J6 issue and the pardoning and commutations of sentences. Whether I agree or disagree with the vast majority of folks who got pardons, I don't want to get into a discussion or a disagreement about that. Let's say that there were a lot of people that were swept up into that day and were wandering through the Capitol and were not aware that they were breaking the law. They were just there for a protest. There were definitely some people who were there that were ringleaders, and then even a subset there, people who were involved in effectively the attack and murder of police officers. What are your thoughts on the pardoning of those folks? Because I think they were identified. We know who they were.
Well, we know that the federal government even recognized the difference between people who broke into the Capitol and people who were likely waved in. And there were people who were waved in. And we know this because of the charges they faced. Some faced trespassing charges, and those were the people who broke in. And then the others were charged not with trespassing, but illegal parading in the Capitol. And so by their very charge, what we've said for 4 years, people were waved in. And they're like, no, nobody was waved in. Well, you're lying, right? So we know that's a lie, that people were waved in simply by the charges that were levied against these people. And so there's this underlying distrust of Joe Biden's Department of Justice and how he decided to mete out that justice. I don't think anyone supports the attack of police officers. But when somebody was in that situation where they were charged with attacking for police officers, and you look at the judge, and this is why they received a pardon, not because Donald Trump wants to let people who attack police officers go, but because of the veracity in which the Justice Department and judges prosecuted these folks unfairly. And by unfairly, because some had the government could put forth video from the Capitol to say this person is guilty. And yet the defendant could not use government footage to prove their innocence, that they felt they could not even submit it. It was not submittable in many cases where they could even submit other footage to suggest their innocence, to have a jury see both sides of the story. And so that, I think, was the dilemma that Donald Trump faced, was not, hey, we're going to pardon people who were violent to police officers, but I'm going to pardon people who didn't get a fair shake by the justice system because they denied them evidence to be shown to a jury of their peers. And I think we all can agree that if you're in that situation and you know of evidence that may either lessen your charge, maybe the police provoked that, whatever, and I'm not trying to make excuses for anybody, but whatever your defense is, you have a right to put forth that defense. And they were denied that right. And so I think we can all agree that somebody who's facing life in prison or 20 years or however many years, a decade or more in prison, they have the right to the strongest defense possible. And Donald Trump pardoned them because they were denied that right.
Okay. I had not heard that explanation. And while what I also heard you say is you don't support murderers, the process is important and people need that right.
Probably like you. I'd rather see one murderer go free than an innocent person go to prison. And so I've long been a supporter of justice reform and DNA, people being able to revisit DNA if they're in jail and have a DNA that needs to be tested, I'm supportive of them being able to go back to that well. And if there's DNA that exists that can prove their innocence, they should not be in prison. And I don't see how anybody can stand on that shaky ground and be taken seriously if you want a fellow American who might be innocent in prison.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
As much as I hate it and you hate it, we'd rather see that one murderer go free to maintain all of our rights.
I appreciate your perspective on that. I had not heard that. So last one is, there hasn't been any conclusion here, but this identification of FBI agents that worked on the Trump prosecution. I have a friend who works at the FBI. I see him every week. So I have a little bit of insight. He doesn't tell me a lot, but I have a little bit of insight into how he thinks and how the people around him think. We're often drinking beer and joking about a variety of things. We don't, again, talk about anything that goes on inside the FBI, but I just hear things. You hear little things. And
right.
Here's one thing that I know about the FBI, and that is that they do what they're told. Plain and simple. These are not free thinkers. These are, what's the mission?
These are buttoned up, yeah.
I'm going to follow that mission, and it's up to the lawyers to make something happen, but I'm going to chase down the facts as much as possible. And on top of all that, the FBI sees itself as the creme de la creme, the best law enforcement. Whatever, there can be bad actors all over the place. My guess is that when the orders came from senior FBI to investigate, and this is part of J6 too, investigate these folks, their job was to go out and interview, find out what they could, and then provide that information to others to make their own conclusions. So what are your thoughts on the concept of retribution for FBI agents that worked on J6?
This is kind of a tough one. And I think that it's, as we've seen these confirmation hearings again from Democrats, these questions from Democrats to people like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard. And they always ask this one question that I always find perplexing. And Pam Bondi, Marco Rubio, they all get asked this. If a career bureaucrat comes up to you and asks and says that XYZ is going wrong, are you willing to listen to them and make a decision against the president? And the reason why they ask that is because Democrats have been putting their supporters in these positions for decades, and they are career, government employees. But when you go way back, and both sides have kind of done it, right? But if you go back 20 years, they were so-and-so's campaign manager, and now they're over at the FBI. And now I'm not saying they're not a good FBI agent. I'm just saying that the question is loaded, because why is a career bureaucrat more important than my position and I'm appointed, right? Well, why do I have to listen to that career bureaucrat? And so, I agree with you. I think we're in agreement that people who you're following their superiors on any of this, in their mind, they were doing their job. They didn't get a choice of whether or not they wanted the job. Now, if you're that person and you decided to rifle through Melania Trump's underwear drawer, then you should be fired for that. And if you decided to go and print words that said classified and lay out evidence and then put these pieces of paper on top of the evidence that say classified so you can get a picture, you should be fired. So we know that some of those actions took place. So how far down in the barrel did the apples rot? So just because somebody's a mid-level or low-level employee doesn't mean that they weren't playing partisan politics with their position. And if they were in the FBI and they were playing partisan politics, they should be fired. And that should go if they're Republican or Democrat. I don't advocate that we get rid of the Democrats. Oh, let's let the Republicans go get their pound of flesh from Democrats. No, there's right and wrong. And what Biden did for sure, and I think it goes back to the Obama administration when we get down to it, what they were doing was wrong. The way they handled it was wrong. And if you were making those decisions and you know darn good and well they were wrong, and you were making partisan political decisions in a nonpartisan political job like the FBI, then adios. And then we should question whether or not somebody like that gets to keep their retirement. You know, like I don't care if you've been there 10 or 20 years. If you've been making these partisan political decisions and you've basically been a partisan operative your entire life in this government position, I don't know that taxpayers should be on the hook for their retirement either.
Well, I appreciate your position there and explaining there may be a small group of folks that are partisans.
I agree.
The vast majority of folks that I see in the FBI, again, from my
I agree with you, small group.
Cracks.
I agree with you, small group.
Yeah. Well, they're going after a large group, or at least seeking to get information from. It's got everybody at the FBI concerned, and only because, hey, wait a minute, I was just asked to go interview somebody. Am I going to get fired for that? So that's their biggest concern. Good. Well, this has been a great conversation, Jamie, and we could go on further, but what we'll do instead is stop now, and then we'll let life happen a little bit, and we'll get back together and talk a little bit more, because I'm guessing something will change and there'll be an update to everything.
It doesn't seem to be stopping or slowing anytime soon. It just seems like they're going to continue to put one foot in front of the other until, like you said, if a court comes in and says, hey, you've overstepped. And then I think it would have to be the U.S. Supreme Court that comes in and says that. Yeah.
So you have a podcast and a Substack. Tell us how we can find.
Yeah, so I'm on Substack at Reasonable Arguments. And my wife and I have a podcast, Reasonable Arguments, News and Nonsense, which is a little bit more fun. I get in the weeds a little bit with I don't want to say in the weeds. I like to say I take a different angle than you normally will see in your normal newscast, your normal writing. And so, for instance, USAID, I compare the growth of agencies and the growth of median incomes compared to the growth of USAID, as a for instance. And I don't know that anybody else has put it in that perspective. Now, News and Nonsense, the podcast, my wife, she tolerates my politics, and she now is a voter, because she wasn't even really a voter, and now she is. So she kind of keeps me grounded. And then, so I kind of get on and talk with the news, and she asks a question and brings it down to, somebody who isn't a political expert, somebody who we did a podcast earlier, and she's like, I've never even heard of USAID before I read it in your Substack. Like, I've never heard of it. I don't even know what it does, why we have it, anything. And so, so I kind of break it down a little bit, like, oh, what is it? Not the higher level conversation that you and I have had. And then she finishes the podcast with, I like to call him Paul Harvey. I know that I'm aging myself greatly by saying Paul Harvey, but, kind of the rest of the story on some fun things, or maybe she'll bring a TikTok on and talk about it. And so we have kind of interesting human interest stories that she discusses. And I share my stories with her so she can research a little bit, and then she doesn't share hers with me, so she goes after shock value. She tries to get a shocking story that will make me go, So.
Well, she's got a great presence, keeps you in check. I read your Substack, Reasonable Arguments. I listen to your podcast. I sometimes watch it on YouTube, and I think it's great, and I think viewers and listeners here should subscribe. So hopefully they will. Great. Jamie, good seeing you. We'll talk again soon.
My pleasure, Barry.
Thanks to Jamie Miller for being our guest today. And thank you for listening. If you want to get in touch, or if you have an interesting topic and know someone you think would be a great guest on the show, send me an email at barry@barrymoline.com. And please leave a 5-star review, which helps others find their way to the Great Ideas Podcast.